Lyndon B Johnson.
Lyndon B Johnson's presidency, successes, failures, and legacy. Lyndon B Johnson, 1908 to 1973, became the 36th President of the United States following the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. His presidency, 1963 to 1969, was marked by ambitious domestic reforms under the banner of the Great Society, as well as significant challenges in foreign policy, particularly the Vietnam War. Johnson's ability to navigate Congress earned him major legislative successes, but his tenure also faced profound societal divisions and unrest. Domestic successes. The Great Society. LBJ's vision for America was encapsulated in his Great Society program, which aimed to eliminate poverty and racial injustice while improving education, healthcare, and urban development. Civil rights advancements. Civil Rights Act of 1964, Johnson championed and signed into law this landmark legislation, which outlawed segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Voting Rights Act of 1965, this act addressed systemic disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South, banning literacy tests and other discriminatory practices. Fair Housing Act of 1968, prohibited discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. War on Poverty. Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, established programs like Job Corps and Head Start to help impoverished Americans. Initiated Medicare, 1965, for seniors and Medicaid, 1965, for low-income individuals, creating the foundation of modern U.S. healthcare. Education and culture. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 provided federal funding to public schools, particularly those in impoverished areas. The establishment of the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities supported cultural development and access to the arts. Environmental initiatives. The Clean Air Act of 1963 and Water Quality Act of 1965 reflected Johnson's commitment to environmental protection. Failures and challenges. Despite Johnson's ambitious agenda, several of his policies faced criticism or fell short of their goals. The Vietnam War. Johnson escalated U.S. involvement in Vietnam, increasing troop numbers to over 500,000 by 1968. This decision, driven by Cold War containment policy, aimed to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, 1964, gave Johnson the authority to use military force without a formal declaration of war, but the war became increasingly unpopular due to high casualties, unclear objectives, and media coverage. Protests against the war intensified, particularly after the Tet Offensive in 1968, which undermined public confidence in U.S. progress despite military claims of victory. Urban riots and social unrest. The mid-1960s saw widespread riots in cities like Watts, Los Angeles, 1965, and Detroit, 1967, fueled by racial tension, police brutality, and economic inequality. Critics argued that the Great Society programs failed to address the systemic issues leading to unrest. Economic pressures. Johnson's spending on the Vietnam War and domestic programs created a fiscal strain, contributing to inflation and weakening the U.S. economy. Critics derided his guns and butter approach, which attempted to fund both military efforts and social reforms simultaneously. Key foreign policy achievements and challenges. Johnson's foreign policy extended beyond Vietnam, although it dominated his presidency. Latin America. The Alliance for Progress continued under Johnson, promoting economic development in Latin America, but it achieved mixed results due to corruption and ineffective implementation. Middle East. During Johnson's presidency, the U.S. supported Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967, strengthening ties with the Israeli state but complicating relationships with Arab nations. Soviet relations. LBJ maintained a firm stance during the Cold War, continuing Kennedy's policies of containment. Efforts to limit the arms race, however, made little progress during his term. Legacy and impact. Johnson left office in 1969 with a legacy of monumental domestic achievements overshadowed by the divisive Vietnam War. Strengths. The Great Society programs had a lasting impact, reducing poverty rates and expanding civil rights. His leadership in passing civil rights legislation marked a turning point in U.S. history, laying the groundwork for future progress toward racial equality. Weaknesses. Vietnam tarnished Johnson's presidency, as many Americans viewed it as a costly and unnecessary war. Johnson's failure to effectively communicate his strategy deepened public dissatisfaction. The societal divisions of the 1960s, exacerbated by race, war, and cultural shifts, reflected the limits of Johnson's leadership. Historical assessment. Historians often view Johnson as one of the most effective presidents in terms of domestic legislation, but one of the most controversial due to his foreign policy. His ability to work with Congress transformed the U.S. social landscape, but his escalation of the Vietnam War remains a major blemish on his record. Conclusion. Lyndon B Johnson's presidency was a period of profound change and contradiction. His vision of a great society sought to uplift millions of Americans, but his foreign policy decisions, particularly in Vietnam, overshadowed his domestic successes. Johnson's tenure underscores the complexity of leadership during a transformative era in U.S. history.